Thank you for joining your favorite fake lawyer, or at least that's what people who disagree with my analyses and maybe my face like to call me, for another legal update on the Markle versus Markle defamation case. Unfortunately, the analysis I made, I think over a year ago at this point, turned out to be accurate. And I say unfortunately because my analysis didn't exactly bode too well for Samantha Markle. Judge Honeywell, who may be a fake judge, according to whether you agree with her analysis or not, decided to dismiss the case in a judgment that was released on the 30th of March, so only a couple of days ago. Now, I will be summarizing the judgment and the reasons for the judge's decision, but if you want an in-depth, almost going through with a fine-tooth comb analysis of the weaknesses of Samantha's case, then please feel free to watch the video I made last year. I think it was 40 minutes long or something, and I will try to remember to link it in the description box below. Now, Samantha's lawyers are not exactly too happy with the way that the media has been covering this latest update. And they have good reason, although of course, we're dealing with the media here. It's always going to be based on clickbait, which I think is happening in this case because most of the headlines I've been seeing state that Meghan Markle won the defamation claim that her sister has brought against her. She may have succeeded with dismissing the case for now, but getting a case dismissed based on a lack of evidence or maybe an error in the pleadings, which is what happened in this instance, is in no way the same as exonerating yourself. So I understand where the frustration is coming with, Samantha's lawyers. Having said that, to be fair, when you actually read the body of the articles, or at least the articles that I've been reading, they do mention that the case was dismissed, and more importantly, that Samantha has, I believe, 14 days, as per Florida law, to amend her complaint in relation to the Oprah statements, not the Finding Freedom ones, and proceed with her defamation claim. So it's not the end of the line for half of the statements at least. Now, from the get-go last year, I stated that the Finding Freedom statements in particular were going to be a significant problem for Samantha. And it really boils down to this very simple reason. Meghan Markle did not publish Finding Freedom. Omid Scobie and Carolyn Duran did. And so I've stated numerous times that perhaps Samantha should think about going after them, naming them as defendants or joining them as defendants or starting, a different lawsuit against them and the publisher. But they didn't do that. I'm sure they have their reasons. Obviously, I'm not privy to them, but now it's cost them this portion of the case. If you have watched any of the previous videos that I've made on defamation, whether it's in relation to this case or Johnny Depp's case, then you'll remember that I have belabored the point that every single element of a cause of action has to be satisfied in order for the case to proceed at all. In essence, with the Finding Freedom statements in particular, the integral element, every element is integral, but one of the integral elements is publication by the defendant. And as I've already mentioned, this was a fatal flaw because Meghan Markle did not publish Finding Freedom. And so if one element is not satisfied, the entire claim is defeated, specifically in relation to the statements emanating out of Finding Freedom in this instance. Now, some of you may be thinking, but wait, what about the 2018 email that Meghan Markle sent to Jason Kanoff with the talking points to debrief the authors? Florida does not recognize defamation claims based on third-party republication. Meghan can't be held liable under Florida law for sending through information to the eventual publishers because they're the ones who had control over publishing it or not. So Florida doesn't place any liability on a source or an alleged source unless that source was directly quoted in the eventual publication that was deemed to be defamatory, or at least mentioned as a source, credited somewhere in the article or publication. And none of this has happened in this instance. In fact, I believe Omid Scobie has outright denied Meghan's involvement in the past until Jason Kanoff, presented us with the truth. But in a nutshell, Meghan was never credited or acknowledged or mentioned or quoted at all as a source in Finding Freedom. The whole idea was to pretend that they were never involved, Meghan and Harry. If you remember, even in Harry's texts to Jason Kanoff, he was very adamant with making sure that there was nothing tracing back to him and Meghan. That was their primary concern. And so the statements in Finding Freedom were dismissed with prejudice. Now this means permanently dismissed. Samantha cannot go back and amend her complaint in relation to these statements in particular and bring them back to court. Now that doesn't mean that Samantha can't pursue the authors of the book, but as far as Meghan is concerned, it ends here. The Oprah interview statements, however, are a bit of a different story. Yet again, the weaknesses that I mentioned last year in my analysis of the case ended up being an actual blow to Samantha's case, even with the Oprah interview statements. What I said about these statements in particular is that I anticipated Meghan's side would argue that these are statements of opinion, not fact, and the judge happened to agree. Meghan's statements about not really being close to Samantha and growing up effectively as an only child have been successfully argued as Meghan's subjective opinion of her childhood, of her upbringing. And what makes this very problematic is a statement of opinion cannot be defamatory, because one of the elements of defamation is that it is a statement of fact. And a quick hack of figuring out whether something is a statement of opinion or a statement of fact is a statement of fact can be objectively proven as false. So there's no leeway, there's no room for subjectivity. But when it comes to, for example, the nature of a relationship, one person may think that you're best friends, and you may think completely otherwise. You may think you're just mere acquaintances. Bear with me though, that doesn't mean it's the end of the line, but let me just go through the rest of the Oprah statements before we talk about what's next for Samantha. A different type of problem arises with the latter two statements. So I think there were in total 3 statements. And the second one was Meghan's claim that she only met Samantha a handful of times. Now, it turns out that that's not what Meghan actually said in the interview. The court had access to the transcripts. It was quoted in the judgment. And what Meghan had actually stated was that the last time she saw Samantha was maybe 18, 19 years ago, and then 10 years prior to that. Now, generally, you're not necessarily required to quote a defendant verbatim. Although, as a lawyer, I do highly recommend that you do that, because it really makes things a lot easier and more straightforward and less chances of the court telling you to go back and amend your complaint, for example. Vagueness and ambiguity can kill a cause of action, and you don't want that. However, in this instance, the judge acknowledges that I'm not expecting you to quote her verbatim, but she found that Samantha went beyond paraphrasing, because the way the judge sees it, 2 things can be true. Meghan and Samantha could have actually seen each other more than a handful of times, but then the last time they saw each other could also have been 18, 19 years ago and 10 years before that. One doesn't negate the other. So what the judge is saying is, you've completely changed the meaning of what the defendant said. She never said that she only met you a handful of times. So unfortunately, because of this, I suppose, vast overstepping, beyond what was actually said and beyond paraphrasing, the element of a false statement of fact was defeated. Meaning Samantha failed to demonstrate that the comment of 18 to 19 years ago is a false statement of fact. So she's basically complaining about something that was never actually stated by Meghan. The final statement was met with pretty much the same fate, with the statement being, according to Samantha, that she only changed her name to cash in on her newfound fame. She alleges that's what Meghan said. But once again, referring to the transcripts, the judge found that Meghan Markle said no such thing. What she had said was in response to Oprah telling her, so you weren't close, you don't really know each other. And then Meghan said, no, in fact, she changed her name when I met Harry. Now, the judge is helpful in this instance. She's starting to pick up on what Samantha and her team are trying to argue, but have failed to do so. So what she's done, if you read a footnote that can very easily be missed in the judgment, the judge helpfully suggests that perhaps you're angling more for defamation by implication rather than your traditional defamation. And they are different. Defamation by implication, as the name suggests, is when a defamatory statement is implied, even by omitting certain facts. And Johnny Depp successfully sued Amber Heard for defamation by implication. She never named him. And I find it so helpful from the judge that she said this, because from reading these statements, the paraphrasing and the assigning of meaning that Meghan never explicitly uttered, it is very clear that that is definitely the cause of action that they should be going for. Because they're arguing that Meghan is implying that Samantha wants to cash in on the name. And that Meghan is implying that she doesn't know Samantha, she's barely seen her. Rather than going for traditional defamation, where you have to look at the words being, stated and see whether there is any defamatory meaning that is not implied, that is being expressly made out of these statements. And that's why it's not the end of the line for Samantha Markle. What the judge has done is dismiss the Oprah Winfrey statements without prejudice, which means that Samantha can go back, and I believe she's been given 14 days to amend her complaint and resubmit. So what I'm hoping is going to happen is her lawyers are going to read this judgment and focus on that footnote and re-strategize and come at Meghan from the defamation by implication angle. Because that's what Meghan's all about. Notice how everything she says is more of a read between the lines. She's really manipulative and slippery like that. It's like the racism allegation. She never flat out said the royal family is racist, but she all but said it. We all understood the message, the entire world. We read between the lines and we got it instantly. Defamation is very tricky because, especially in this day and age when everyone gets offended over everything, you really have to be careful with, creating an environment for people to feel safe in speaking the truth, not their truth, not a subjective version, and their opinions, and putting them out there without the fear of being sued for defamation or getting threats of defamation lawsuits. Because that's what's happened in the past few decades, and there has been significant reform in the area of defamation to make sure that vexatious and frivolous litigants are stopped. Trust me, there are people out there who try to silence you because you're speaking the truth and you're exposing their crimes and their wrongdoing, which deserve to be exposed, if not prosecuted. So before you get frustrated, do understand that these are all, checks and balances to make sure that people don't abuse the system. Because the only thing worse than a guilty person getting away with something is an innocent person being accused of and convicted of something, right? And while this isn't a criminal case, think about all the people who were speaking the truth, but perhaps didn't have a good lawyer, or something wrong, happened along the line where they ended up actually getting silenced by their own perpetrator as a result of a successful defamation lawsuit. What I also really want people to remember is that there is the final element of defamation that has to be satisfied regardless of what anyone says about you, which is that you suffered harm, may it be to your reputation or in an economical sense. Samantha, for example, is claiming injurious falsehood, which was also dismissed because she was found to be double dipping, essentially. There is a single action rule in Florida where if you're suing someone over the exact same facts, the same statements in this instance, and you're claiming compensation from two different avenues, being defamation and something else, for example, injurious falsehood, you can't do that. You're already claiming compensation for defamation, and so Samantha can't use the same statements to get compensation for injurious falsehood. But if this proceeds to trial and it's found that, yeah, Meghan said all these things, all of the elements of defamation were satisfied apart from the final one, if Samantha isn't able to prove any actual harm to her reputation or income, then the claim fails. So it is an uphill battle for Samantha. She's going to have to prove that her book sales actually tanked. I've said this before, even last year. They're going to have to find concrete evidence of harm suffered. Because without harm, without actual serious consequences, there is no cause of action, even if someone lied. By the way, it wasn't completely smooth sailing for Meghan either, because she wanted to claim fees and legal costs. So Samantha pays her fees and legal costs so far because she argued that Samantha's case was without merit and under the anti-SLAPP statute, which essentially protects people who express their opinions and exercise their freedom of speech in connection with a public issue. In this instance, we don't even really have to go to the anti-SLAPP statute protections because the court found that it was way too early, it was far too premature to determine whether the case was actually without merit. Because the judge stated, well, Samantha could still go back, amend her claim, and come back with an actual valid defamation claim. And so that application was dismissed and Meghan didn't get her costs and fees paid for by Samantha. You take your victories where you can find them, so there's that. And that's it. I hope I was able to explain things and clear things up for you if you were a little bit lost or enraged at this outcome. I know a lot of people are saying, oh no, Meghan Markle gets away with it yet again. It's just an error in the pleadings, in the complaint itself. It may be fatal. I'm not necessarily saying that the Oprah interview statements will succeed if these amendments are made. There's still room for another dismissal, but all is not lost for Samantha at this point. So yeah, I guess I'll keep my eyes peeled on this one. That's it. Take care. Bye.